I'll do the same. I'll start this so that it's recording. Boker Tov, good morning.
Morning.
Requisite muting. Just as a destination check, we're here now, in case you didn't notice, and not next week. Next week, the 25th, which is Erev Pesach, we'll hit pause so that we can do proper Pesach preparations.
Brisket.
Though, again,
not for you though, Rabbi.
Not for me though.
I also have one quick question before we start. Is my clock watching now expanded to include New York State-oriented sidebars?
Correct. Yeah. Watch we may.
Okay.
As we learned last week's chapter, there was a golden statue with feet of clay. So that's a pro which enters English, right? That know that anyone that gets looked up to may prove to have feet of clay. So this we're gonna begin Daniel chapter 3 in a moment, but we'll take next week off Erev Pesach and the following week during Pesach. So I have a chance to somewhat catch my breath and all of this. That's our destination check. With that, I think it's kosher. Which the part of the shame of it next week. The next week also will be just after Israel's fourth election in 2 years and in 24 months. So so sometimes in this space we would sort of debrief Israeli elections and things like this. But apropos of what Bob said a moment ago, you might be able to find on YouTube the last time we debriefed after Israel's last election, and you can just watch it again for the current election cycle. That's always an option.
I'd just like to mention that some time ago I was in China and we were at some temple or other, and they had a place where you can find your fortune. You just take it and you read your fortune. But if you don't like it, you just throw it away and you take another fortune. And I think that's the Israeli election somehow.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, but Rabbi, all that pales to the importance of shtisel starting up again next week on the 25th. Never mind the Israeli election.
Yeah, most importantly, right, especially for this crowd. Yeah, definitely, yeah. So you won't have me, but you'll have shtisel. Season 3 drops on Netflix on the same day, a week from today. So there's that. You can decide for yourselves whether or not that's a Shechianu moment. Yes. So all of that, and technically next week is Ta'anit Bechorot. Thursday is the Fast of the Firstborn. For those who want, there'll be an online siyum through the Rabbinical Assembly that you can sign up for at 8 a.m. that day. And if you want to sell your chametz to me, things like that, you can. That sort of information, Dorit will send it out, but it's at rabbiselzberg.blogspot.com. And if you go to Haggadot.com, there, that's the sort of one of the go-to sites for a make your own online Haggadah for those who are having Zoom seders and things like this. With that, let's dive into the text because that's more fun. The bracha for Torah study is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu v'tzivanu v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And we're going through the book of Daniel, which is unusual because no one ever reads Daniel. And maybe you see why that is, but we're doing it anyway for the sake of not just doing greatest hits, but doing some of the obscure stuff. The last week in chapter 2, Daniel is serving in the in exile in Nebuchadnezzar's court, miraculously interprets the king's dreams, which the king is really impressed with, and from there we transfer to chapter 3. Chapter 3 may or may not be aware of chapter 2, which is to say, either the king is looking to take Daniel's people, i.e., Jews or followers of God, down a peg after being so impressed, or it exists independently of that earlier story. You can take whatever either interpretation works. Chapter 3 is a little strange in that, again, it shows Nebuchadnezzar is going to press the Jews to worship a gigantic statue, which is not typical of Babylonian emperors. They generally were chilled out in terms of other people's religious observance. You don't have to do it, though it does have echoes of Antiochus IV, of the Hanukkah story, and Jews being forced to worship an idol. So there's some debate going on, since many people assume that, scholars assume that that Daniel comes into its current form during Maccabean times, but not necessarily this chapter. So there's some lack of clarity over when this exactly comes from. It's again written in Aramaic, not in Hebrew, though most of as Robert Alter notes, most of the loan words in it, they're sort of like loan words that come from Persian, indicating that the individual knew Persian. And there are very few, though there are a couple Greek loan words that obviously in the time of Daniel, which is purporting to be right in 6th century BCE, right after, during the first exile, they would have known Persian, but not Greek. It would have been pre-significant contact with Greece. I will note when a couple of those words pop up. Chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. A cubit, again, is 18 inches, from the tip of your elbow to the tip of your finger, about 8, which is assumed to be about 1.5 feet. So, 80 feet high. And 6 feet wide, which you don't have to be an engineer, just to head off. I know you guys well enough to know that would get comments on this. That obviously doesn't work in reality, that you'd have something that's 80 feet high and 10, 12 feet wide. Presumably it's meant to mean really, really big, as opposed to being a literal measurement. 80 cubits high, 6 cubits wide. He set it up in the Dura Valley in the province of Babylonia. Nebuchadnezzar set out to assemble the satraps, the governors, and the officials, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, and the commanders of all the camps and all the administration of the provinces to come for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So again, these long lists come every so often. They're repeated verbatim. Whoever's right, the author of Daniel, likes these long lists. Of all these different functionaries in the Persian court. Alter notes, one should note that most of the bureaucratic titles here are Persian loan words, and that there are no borrowings from the Greek. Meaning, again, that's what I mentioned a moment ago, that whoever's writing this is clearly conversant in Persian court culture, even if whether or not he's describing it accurately, he knows all the words and things like that. The Greek will seep in a moment. Then did the satraps, the governors, and the officials, the counselors, the judges, the commanders of the camps, and all the administrators of the province assemble for the dedication of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they were standing before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Why this sort of repetition? Normally in the rest of the Tanakh, we usually assume some sort of deep meaning when there's repetition. I don't know that there is here, or there's nothing indicating that there is deep meaning here. Usually, again, as Alter knows, when the Tanakh gives lists, those lists will, when they're repeated, will have a telling change. It'll be one thing that's different, and you learn something from that one thing that's different. That's not really the case here. He seems to be repeating because because he likes repeating. It's not necessarily deep meaning in there. 4. And the herald called out loudly, "To you it is said, peoples, nations, and tongues, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lute, the zither, the lyre, the flute, and all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down at once shall be cast into the furnace of blazing fire." Now you see where this is going, right? So we have a gigantic statue of the king. Whenever like the musical call comes, everyone has to bow down and worship it. Now, again, this is sort of like is unlikely a Babylonian move. They don't much care for religious coercion. The Babylonians destroyed the temple, but that was for lack of tribute and not paying and not paying financial fealty. And it wasn't due to the fact that the Israelites were worshiping a different god than the Babylonians. So that, though, of course, again, as I said at the outset, that sort of move was, in fact, present in Maccabean times, when the whole point of the Hanukkah story is you have to worship this and not that. And this line, by the way, that line 5 is where some of the Greek creeps in. Kol karna u mesura kita kantrus savka pasanterin. Pasanterin, what he translates as the symbols, I think is how he's doing psanter. Psanter gets adopted into modern Hebrew as, modern Hebrew fans, psanter, piano. These instruments, because the words sort of like primarily appear or only appear here, like you don't really know what they are. So like it's just a list of musical instruments, but psanter will be repurposed in modern Hebrew as the word for piano. And the next one, like the last item in the list, is symphonia. Symphonia is obviously a Greek word that somehow made it into this list, and is obviously the whatever. I'm not an entomologist, but it's obviously the root of symphony, right? So the last, so in Aramaic or in Hebrew characters, the last item in the list is symphonia. He translates flute. I don't know if JPS takes it differently, but fun note of the day, in Hebrew that's symphonia, which is obviously where symphony comes from, which obviously indicates that in the final form, whoever was dealing with this had contact with Greek culture, because symphonia is not a native word to Hebrew. And all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Does he do the same? Does JPS give the same list of instruments? Horn, pipe, zither, lyre, psaltery, bagpipe, and all types of instruments. And altar has horn, pipe, lute, zither, lyre, flute, and all kinds of music. Art scroll goes with so horn, whistle, tambourine, drum, cymbals, flute, and all kinds of music. So again, the list isn't exactly the same, the point being music. Bow down and worship. And if not, you'll be cast into the blazing fire. I wonder what's going to happen. Verse 7, therefore, when they would hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lute, the zither, the lyre, the flute, and all kinds of music. I don't know what the zither is. Somebody here probably does. When they would hear this, all the peoples, nations, and tongues would at once worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Right, so I'm not going to get thrown in a fire furnace if for lack of bowing down at a statue. Because of this, at times the Chaldean men came forward and denounced the Jews. They spoke out and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, there's always somebody telling on us, O king, may you live forever. You, O king, put out a decree that any man who heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lute, the zither, the lyre, the flute, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Now you see, like at the outset, I said that whoever wrote this loved lists. I was not exaggerating. And again, I don't, usually in most of the books of the Tanakh, they'll just like say, and so forth, or a version of and so forth. Here, not the case. Verse 11, and whoever did not fall down and worship would be cast into a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jewish men whom you have appointed over the work of the province of Babylonia, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They have paid no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your God, and do not worship the gold statue that you set up. So they got turned in. Daniel is curiously absent from this list. And Daniel doesn't really appear in this chapter. These are his three friends that he was associated with chapter 1 and in chapter 2. There's fasting and things like that, and they were all a group of 4. Here, only the 3 others appear. Why? I mean, so again, critical theory would say, if you want to just say the story, just Daniel's not part of it. He was somewhere else. Critical theory would say that this was a pre-existing story or a separate story that then gets folded into the Daniel narrative. Maybe not. Maybe it's just, again, that Daniel was, off that week. Either way, yeah, go ahead.
Couldn't it also be that Daniel had a different kind of position? He was interacting with the king, and the others were interacting with the people themselves. So maybe that's why they picked on them.
Correct. Yeah, so it could be so the good point. So off that we could just conceivably mean some version of that, meaning that he's not around when the call comes, worship the statue, or he's not in a position where anyone knows what he's doing. Right. He's in his office. Right now I'm in my office. Nobody knows what I'm doing. Right. The door is closed. So something like that. But Daniel won't appear here, despite the fact that the story is in the book of Daniel. This story will primarily be on what happens to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they're caught not bowing down to the statue. Again, echoes of Esther, right? I mean, it's not a statue that causes Mordecai's trouble in the book of Esther, but it certainly is sort of this bowing down. And more to the point, you see why this story would have been important to the generation of the Hasmoneans during the Hanukkah story, because this is precisely what they were facing, right? It's this. 13. Thus did Nebuchadnezzar say in anger and fury to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then were these men brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke out and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Again, this love of, you see the style, the love of bliss, that you are not serving my God and are not worshiping the gold statue that I put up. Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lute, the zither, the lyre, and the flute, and all kinds of music, and you worship the statue that I've made, all will be well. And that's inserted, that's not in the Hebrew. It's just he's trying to make sense of the sentence. Do it. Fine. And if you do not worship, you will at once be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can save you from my hands? Right? Great line. We'll see. This God that you're worshiping, we'll see. Sorry. Now, again, if you part of what's difficult about this is, as you might remember from last week, the end of chapter 2, verse 47 of chapter 2, this same king said, in truth, Daniel, your God is the God of gods and master and kings and revealer of mysteries, for you are able to reveal this mystery. The Nebuchadnezzar seems to buy into this at the end of chapter 2, doesn't at the beginning of chapter 3. The art scroll, traditional worldview, they'd say that, well, this is then Nebuchadnezzar sort of like trying to take the Jews down a peg despite this, or critical theory would be like, that these are separate stories, make it work either way. So he says, we'll see how much you believe once you're threatened with death. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to answer you about this matter. For our God, whom we serve, is able to save us from the furnace of blazing fire, and from your hand, O king, he shall save us. And if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your God, and we will not worship the gold statue that you have set up, right? And this, again, echoes of the book of Esther here with Esther. Esther, of course, will say, said, like when, I will face the king, even, if he hasn't invited me, and the penalty could be death. And if I save the people, I'll save the people. And if I die, I die. Like, she makes that declaration, so like, maybe I'll live, maybe I'll die. So be it. What else can I do? These guys say a version of the same thing. Like if God saves us, God saves us. And if not, we're not worshiping your God. These are the terms of their covenant. 19, new paragraph. Then was Nebuchadnezzar filled with wrath, and the look at his face changed because of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke out and said to stoke the furnace 7 times hotter than it was wont to be stoked. And to the valiant warriors of his army, he said to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. Right. So thus these men were bound in their trousers, their tunics, their headgear, and their garments, and were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. So like, why mention the clothes? Like sort of like all like them and everything with them are going to be thrown in. Like now they don't, like, if they're not going to do it, we'll take them at their word. We'll turn it up to 11. And we'll throw him in. Therefore, because the king's word was severe, and the furnace was intensely stoked, these men who had brought up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did the fire's flames kill. This is obviously part of the story. Like, it's so hot. How hot was it? The furnace is so hot that it consumes even the guards, the jailers, who are throwing them into the furnace, are don't make it out alive because he's had it turned up so much, right? That is to underline the miracle. Not only is God obviously going to save the 3 servants of God, but the idolaters, who aren't even as close, are taken by the fire. It's 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then was King Nebuchadnezzar astounded and arose in haste. He spoke out and said to his counselors, "Did we not throw these 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "Indeed, O king." He answered and said, "Why, I see 4 men walking unbound within the fire, and there's no hurt in them, and the appearance of the 4th is like a divine being." All right. So this is the key scene in the miracle, and this is like the key moment right there. They're like, he looks, and it's a great visual, very cinematic, right? They go in, and they're just like wandering around, and the ropes and such have burned off, and they are just sort of like wandering around, and there's some sort of angel with them. This is verse 25. It says the 4th Dame Levar Elohim, as which is like Ben Elohim in Aramaic, right? And as this divine being, what he translates as divine being. Alter notes, the literal sense of the Aramaic is son of God. But as with its Hebrew equivalent, which appears frequently in earlier biblical texts, the idiom does not suggest filial connection with God, but rather belonging to the general category of celestial figures. He says that about, I think, about as well as it could be said. How JPS translates the verse 25. They translate divine being. Art Scroll probably also will go with divine being. Angels, they translate. So it's not the same word as angels. It's not a malach. It's every so often, the Psalm for Tuesday, Psalm 82, has B'nai Elim. Genesis 6 has B'nai Elim, like children of God or sons of God. It pops up every so often and seems never to mean son of God. It just means some type of, as he says, celestial retinue or divine being or angel, whatever term you want to use, something like this. Now, Nebuchadnezzar recognizes it, right? He says, oh, look, angel. Like every so often we have like angel or divine being that looks like a human. Here, it's something that he recognizes as somehow being from God.
Rabbi,
Yes.
could this not be dangerous in some Jewish communities who will say, I will not take the COVID-19 vaccine, God will protect me?
Well, tell it to the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel seems totally unconcerned with COVID-19. So yes, I mean, but this is all over, right? So you can, God will protect me. Pick a, hold on. There's also, you can say the same thing about Passover, even from the new Haggadah, Seder in Motion, by Ron and Dr. Leora Isaacs, the available at fine temple gift shops all over Greater Bridgewater. Right? The Israelites are saved by a miracle, right? I mean, this is sort of this is a little more like to the point, but obviously, like they're brought out of slavery and the sea splits and there are plagues and blah blah blah. So yeah, and there are explicit teachings in the Talmud that are very influential. That like if you're doing a mitzvah, you'll be protected, right? You'll be protected. God protects you if you're doing a mitzvah. And so if I'm driving somebody to get a COVID shot, I'm not going to get into an accident because God's protecting me because I'm doing a mitzvah. Or if I'm studying Torah, I'll be protected. So yeah, one could say that.
Some Orthodox communities quote that
sure
as reasons not to
yes.
be.
So they're wrong to do so. So yes, and the so yeah, absolutely. So the advantage of texts like this is that they've historically given chazaka, given strength to people in hard times, and have led people not just to give in to whatever power is out there. And the flip side of that is occasionally people will make bad decisions on it, right? So it both helps you stand up to tyrants and pharaohs and dictators, and also conceivably could lead you in the wrong direction as well. But that on some extent is true for any text. But yes, one could say that, and you would be wrong to do so. And here, of course, sort of like unlike in the Exodus story, in the Exodus story at least, like they do what God asked them to do. Here, they just say we're willing to martyr ourselves for the cause. and if we die, we die. So the fact that they get saved is merely a bonus to them because they were willing to accept the consequences regardless. And to Richard's point, like that's part of it, right? Like individuals who, and I well know the consequences go out beyond them, but they're willing to accept the consequences regardless. Either way, these three guys survive the fire. They're walking and they're just sort of like wandering around inside. I sort of like that image with some sort of angel or some sort of divine being with them. Nebuchadnezzar is watching this angrily, yells at the folks who are still around him. Verse 26. Then did Nebuchadnezzar approach the gate of the furnace of blazing fire. He spoke and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Like would he really Ilya, which is the altar notes. He's using the Aramaic translation of El Elyon, Most High God. In the Abraham stories, they're worshiping El Elyon, which is also thought to be the Canaanite god, and every so often will pop up as happens a couple of times. Words used to describe Canaanite gods will be appropriated and used for God. The language will be appropriated. El Elyon is one of those. Familiar, from the Tefillah.
Rabbi?
Yep.
Since this portion of the story appears in the book of Daniel, and Daniel is otherwise absent at this point, is it possible that God is using Daniel to serve the function of the angel?
I suppose conceivably, though, he seems to be just off. I haven't seen, like, even Art Scroll just sort of like lets this pass, or at least my edition, which isn't like a full commentary. So like lets this pass without comment. Like that's, I mean, like I thought similarly when sort of like first looking at it, but not necessarily. Here, in JPS it says that there'll be a few other angels appearing. It says particularly verse chapter 7 and chapter 8, but like it doesn't. You don't have to go there. Meaning that given a desire to say the simplest explanation, not so. And also like Jewishly, there's not, even in this, which is weird, you don't see people like being two things, meaning Daniel doesn't get to like suddenly become an angel and then come back, or even just half of that. So it seems the simplest thing is that they're being saved by an angel. If to use like modern movie images, like sort of like picture the angel like sort of like putting out a bubble or a force field around him, or like and that is protecting them. The angel is there in the furnace with them and is emanating the protective bubble.
I wanted to say that in answer. What about the Holocaust? We have an example in history, almost our own time, where God didn't step in and save these people. That doesn't seem to be the way God works.
Correct. You're right. I mean, Holocaust is the worst and easiest example, but obviously we can cite hundreds of examples through history of so yes, I mean that's the there are two things going on here, which is like the stories don't describe the Tanakh constantly doesn't describe the way God actually works. It's simply not the case. So I mean, you can say that your Seder as well. The sea isn't split so that people can walk out of Europe, right? It's just not the way the actual world works. these stories, I think, are a different genre of literature. To your point, to Richard's earlier point, not the way the world in fact works. And I think those who interpret it as this is the way the world works is sort of like misinterpreting it. These are inspiring legends. Or this is like when somebody's saved from the fiery furnace, inspiring legend. Though, yeah. And a version of this then will be the Midrash on Abraham will include this, right? The Abraham will, in the Midrash, survives a fiery furnace for almost the exact same reasons in the trials of Abraham midrashically. So this will be influential, but correct. God doesn't save you from fiery furnaces of any sort. The Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, he shouts out. The king does. Thus then did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out from within the fire, verse 27, and the satraps, governors, officials, and the king's counselors were assembled and saw the men. The fire had no power over their bodies, and the hair on their heads were not singed, and their trousers were in no way different, and the smell of fire had not touched them. Like sort of like levels of miracle here. Nebuchadnezzar spoke out and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his messenger and saved his servants, who trusted in him and defied the king's word and submitted their bodies, for they would not serve nor worship any god except their God." Right? So Nebuchadnezzar, as a guy who rules things, is impressed with God's loyalty to God's subjects. Let a decree be set out by me that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks ill of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces, and their house be turned into a dung heap, for there is no other God that can rescue like this. So the king's speech is impressive, and he's impressed and wants to and extends protection and respect to this. The word used here is a different word than one used earlier, divine messenger. It means angel, right? Sort of like sees it as an angel and things like this, and gives protection to the Jews of the kingdom. That's probably what's going on here, right? Like if this is the point of the story might be the king recognizing how wonderful God is. What we suffer for, the king finally realizes, and that is similar to the previous chapter.
Why wasn't there an instant conversion?
Weirdly, and last time as well, right? Like after the dream sequence, a similar thing happens. He recognizes God as God. There's no other God that can rescue like this, that can save you like this. It really is. It's like wow, you guys are number one, or your God is number one, or whatever. And which is sort of what happened last time. Alter's comment is a good one. The king's word seemed to say that he recognized the unique power of the God of Israel to effect miraculous salvation, but does not necessarily renounce his belief in other gods, only concedes that they would not be as powerful as the God of the three exiled Judahites. So again, he doesn't actually convert, it seems. He's just like, it's the most powerful one there is. I don't know, every so often this is what, it's you may recognize upon riding in your neighbor's car, when we used to be able to ride in each other's cars, that wow, like this one, this whatever, this Lexus is nicer than my Honda. You might not go out and get one, but like you sort of like recognize, yep, this is the best one out there. He seems to say, yep, smoothest ride comes from the God of Israel. Everyone should respect that fact, but not necessarily his cup of tea.
But it's also, there's a hierarchy, and he's not going to get rid of the lower ones because he might need those also.
Yep. Yeah, he's just not a monotheist.
Right.
Your God, though, seems to be the best God at saving, right? We got gods for everything. We got gods for rain. We got gods for fertility. We got gods for the harvest. Your God, best saving God I've ever heard of, because I've never seen anything like this. Yeah. And offers them protection, right? Like this is like the dramatic part of the story. And Alter will note that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego like aren't really characters. They don't really. There's no personality to them. They're just stand-ins for pious Jews. There's no actual. Unlike for like certainly David or Solomon or Esther or Ruth or Naomi, they're people, and you sort of like felt with each of them. Even somebody with comparatively few lines like Naomi, like she has, you feel her being pulled in different directions, and there's a there's a person there. These guys, they're just they're stock characters. They're stock pious Jews out of central casting. There's no conflict. There's no there's no depth to the character. They're just there. Again, different type of literature. Underlining how cool it is that, again, for Ruth, Naomi, Solomon, Esther, whoever like that, there's conflict and development of the characters. Here, not so much.
Rabbi, could it also be that when you say it's a different kind of literature, maybe it's a different kind of divine view, that I read a commentary that Rabbi Sachs had done on the building of the Mishkan, and what he said was, up to that point, I just thought it was brilliant. He said, up to that point, God acted upon us all the way through the story, that we were the recipients of the action. But when it came time to build the Mishkan, he basically said, assemble your team and do this job, because you have to participate. So I'm thinking that as our ancient religion has evolved, we've come to this thought that we're partners with God, as opposed to just God taking over and doing everything, and that we're the recipients of the action.
That's a good take. Here, I wonder which category this one falls into, this story. But I like that take. It is a great take, which is, rather than the passive, the Israelites, to get out of Egypt,
right,
don't have to do all that much.
They only had to follow, really. That's what I thought was so fascinating about his commentary. All they had to do was follow. But here, in the building of the Mishkan, God said, get your leaders, decide who's going to be on what committee, and make it happen. And then God sat back.
And you have to do it, right? Yeah. So the Exodus version of that, just for a quick detour, like my favorite moment is, I think Zach may say this as well, like the putting of the blood on the doorposts. It's like, what, like I've got on a different window on this computer, I have a shul list of everyone's address and phone number and thing like this. Like God didn't have a list of where the Jews lived. Like, how could that be? It's like, no. The blood on the doorpost isn't for God to know. It's for them to know. Like, they have to take ownership of their actions and yeah. So yeah. That's if that's a moving from passive to active. That now the Israelites are going to have to maintain the relationship. God's not going to be a one-way thing from the other direction. Here, what's the view? What's the theology here? Here it doesn't feel more developed than what you just said.
No, it doesn't, but we're still in the ancient time, correct? Right. We're not in the time of the exile. We're not in the time of the Talmud, right. All of that.
Of the second exile. Yeah. So and yeah. Yeah. So it's a, I mean, and I think what sort of is sometimes it's a very simplistic view of God. I go into the furnace and God saves me, right? And then the evil king will be converted, and they live happily ever after. Like, so yeah. Yeah, so it's worth noting, but I think the most useful thing is you're noting or one of the useful things is noting that even within the tradition, within the classical tradition, things develop and change, and the image of God and the role of the people develops and changes. It's not just modern liberal rabbis doing this. This is part of it. We'll get to the end of the chapter. So he says, I'm going to do verse 29 again because it's just to highlight it. The king continues, let a decree be sent out that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks ill of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces, and their house shall be turned into a dung heap. For there's no other God that can rescue like this. So it's sort of nice that he's converted, but maybe there could be like a better insult the Jews, and we're going to cut you to pieces and burn down your home. So it's a little extreme. Then 30, then did the king exalt Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylonia. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all his people, nations, and tongues that dwell on all the earth, may your well-being abound. The signs and wonders that the Most High God, again, as sort of translation of El Elyon, has performed with me, it pleases me to tell. His signs, how great they are, and his wonders, how powerful. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion for all generations. So he gives puts out a statement, that last line of which is Malchutcha Malchut Kolomim Shaltcha B'chol Dor Vador in Aramaic, which is to say that the mem line of Ashrei is in Aramaic, is translated into Aramaic here. Badin Malka Atzlach Sadrach Meshach Va'avar L'goy b'medinat Bavel. Sorry, that's the my mistake. The Va'ata Timchei di Avar Ame Allah Safar Demed. Aramaic is hard. I crush my teeth on. Malchute Malchut Alam Shalte Amdar Vadar, which is a familiar line from Ashrei, Psalm 145, the mem line put into Aramaic, as these chapters are. So not only is the king impressed, but he's quoting Ashrei, coming pretty firm.
Rabbi?
Yes.
In line 31, it says the signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed with me. What does that mean? Is Nebuchadnezzar giving himself credit? Or is that just the translation?
With me, the signs and wonders that the Most High God's work for. So JPS will translate for me. The signs and wonders that he's done for me, meaning which reads a little more easly.
Yeah.
Meaning like sort of like I witnessed this stuff and like because of it I'm impressed. Our school does it behooves me to relate the signs and wonders that the Supreme God has performed for me. And the Aramaic on it is Imi, with me. Yeah, you can go any direction with it. That's the thing with, yeah. With me strikes me as the closest to the Aramaic, and the for me is to make it understandable, I would say. And that's sort of like typical of Alter, meaning that that's sort of like, again, JPS and Art School want to make it comprehensible, and Alter occasionally will be like, I didn't understand this, and I didn't understand this in Aramaic, and neither should you in English. And I'm giving you then, like, instead of JPS doing what it probably means, Alter is giving you, this is what it says. Now, what's others? May be tempted to I'm going to push forward a line or two, because chapter 4 may be a continuation of this, or the very beginning of it, because like you see, it begins with a quote. Alter's note on this is, despite the late medieval chapter divisions, most modern scholars plausibly conclude that the apostolatory formulation, meaning the letter like beginning of a letter like of the last few lines of chapter 3, is actually the beginning of the royal message to the people of the realm that continues here. So he sort of continues on. Chapter 4 begins, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was tranquil in my home and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream and it frightened me, and thoughts upon my couch and visions in my head panicked me. By me has an edict been issued for all the sages of Babylonia to come before me, that they make known to me the meaning of this dream. Then did the soothsayers, the wizards, Chaldeans, I mentioned that before, and diviners came, and I said the dream to them, but its meaning they did not make known to me. And latterly, Daniel came before me, whose name is Balthazar, like the name of my God, in whom the spirit of the holy God resides. And I said the dream to him, Balthazar, master soothsayer, of whom I know that the spirit of the holy gods resides in you, and no mystery is withheld from you. These are the visions of my dream, and I saw in its meaning. And the visions in my head upon the couch I saw, and look, there was a tree in the earth. Its height was great. I'll put you on pause there as he gives his dream. So he's sort of speaking to all of his kingdom here. And again, he doesn't like calling him Daniel in public. He likes giving his Babylonian name to show that he's being assimilated into the kingdom, whether or not he in fact is. And is now like sort of like proclaiming out like how wonderful Daniel is with his dream interpretations.
But Rabbi, he didn't say the dream to him.
Correct. Right. The Daniel is like in charge now. The latter Daniel came before me. This seems to be him saying, I called him in, and Daniel's going to do it. He has interpreted a dream in the past and hasn't yet. So it's true, he hasn't. He's being called in to do it. Or this is describing something that already happened that took place off screen or off text, as it were. Yeah, but you're right, he hasn't. In the text that we've seen, this is building on chapter 2 and sort of like skipping over the events of chapter 3, and we're back to dream interpretation. The holy gods came to me, and I related the dream to him, saying, Balthazar, chief magician, in whom I know the spirit of the holy gods to be, whom no mystery baffles, tell me the meaning of my dream vision that I have seen, the vision of my mind in bed. And here, helpfully, JPS formats what comes next, the dream that he says Daniel interpreted, as a poem, meaning sort of like with that what comes next is a new paragraph, or can be formatted differently. we go with this? I may pause there. What's going to happen is, a way of preview, the king will describe his dream. Daniel, of course, will, in the end, interpret it. And the king will remain troubled. So I think, for the sake of clarity and being able to pick it up, I'm going to pause there. What we're all leading up to, because I know what people are what one looks forward to with Daniel, is there'll be more. Chapter 5 will have more strange dream interpretations. The very end of chapter 5, really, for the most part, in chapter 6, we get to the lion's den. Like the signature scene of Daniel is the lion's den. The fiery furnace isn't it, but we're getting there. So this. What do we take out of chapter 3? The fiery furnace scene, in fact, I think is more influential as a when it sort of gets transferred to the story of Abraham, where it gets more play. Because again, no one ever reads Daniel, but people talk about Midrashim of Abraham, and Abraham with the idol, with his father's idols. Abraham, the Rashi will refer to Abraham's 10 trials, and one of those trials is not bowing down to a statue and being thrown into from Nimrod and being thrown into a fiery furnace and surviving. So the sort of theme gets transferred, and that's where it plays out more, and that's part of the piety of the age. If you're loyal to God, God will be loyal to you and save you. So that's the theology. Whether or not it works is something else entirely, but that's the theology.
If that works, Rabbi, and to Laura's point, how is somebody, especially the ultra-Orthodox, who dwell on this is real, how are they to reconcile what they've seen or possibly lived through in Germany?
If you're loyal to God, God will be loyal to you. If bad things happen, it is our sins that cause it. If you're not loyal to the covenant, then the other partner to the covenant won't be loyal to you. It works in that direction. If people aren't following the mitzvot, in the Torah it says, if you do not follow the covenant, terrible things will happen, and you and your children will die terrible deaths. That's how. It is the pshat of the text, with the basic sense of the text. Now again, whether or not that's a good theology is something else entirely. But there you are. Yeah.
Class tonight at 7 o'clock, Rabbi?
Class tonight at 7 o'clock, regardless of my behavior. But yeah, that's classical Jewish theology. Again, not mine, but that's classical theology.